Woodstock, a frontier in counterculture. Woodstock was a music festival that took place over the summer of 1969. Diverse groups of over 500,000 people gathered on a dairy farm in Bethel, New York. They came to see and hear 32 musical acts that would play over the course of 4 days. Some commonly recognized performers were Jimi Hendrix, Richie Havens, Santana, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Janis Joplin, and the Grateful Dead. Many of these acts performed controversial music relevant to the politics of the 1960s, which caused America to realize people have the power to change history. Today, Woodstock is still widely recognized as a frontier in counterculture because they were the first mainstream music festival that focused on political issues as well as music. What is counterculture? Counterculture is a cultural movement that is different from mainstream society and its views. Some core moral views associated with counterculture are civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and a rejection of the Vietnam War. Woodstock itself was an example of counterculture because of the crowd that was there and what they believed in. Woodstock stands as the largest musical festival in history, so it brought light to many political and moral views that were considered controversial at the time. The 1960s were one of the most pivotal generations because it involved new frontiers in political stances that hadn't been seen in previous years. Woodstock is an example of a frontier in the political counterculture of the 60s. The idea of younger people staying up for 3 days straight listening to live music was very different in itself and what was considered normal to mainstream society. Many people who attended Woodstock would have referred to themselves as hippies. Hippies were people who had an unconventional appearance, such as long hair or colorful clothing. They also had overlooked values for themselves and for other people. Where and how? Woodstock was thought of by 4 young men: John Roberts, Joel Rosman, Artie Cornfield, and Michael Lang. Creedence Clearwater Revival was the first popular band to sign up for the festival. Because of them, artists began rushing in to perform at Woodstock. When it came to where the festival would be held, there was a venue in place, but at the last minute, the original venue backed out, so they had to find another place to host the festival. Dairy farmer Max Yasker came to their rescue, offering his farm to host Woodstock. Now that the men had the venue and artists ready for Woodstock, they needed to figure out ticketing. The show was just days away, but people were showing up early. With no way to efficiently get people to buy tickets, they made Woodstock a free music festival. The Way of Woodstock. The expected number of people to attend was around 50,000. But by the end of the festival, there was an estimated 500,000 people. The audience was very diverse. Many were hippies and people with free minds. A crowd like this wasn't common, which made way for Woodstock to become an even more prominent frontier in history. In 1969, America was dealing with political changes and movements. The Vietnam War was a controversial topic, along with the civil rights movement. The audience was filled with young people who wanted peace and unity. As the Morning Herald 1969 states, Woodstock set a noteworthy first, with the festival's officials letting everyone in free. The people there set another. We established good relations with the local yokels, who were first leery about their town being destroyed by youthful rioters and freaks. The people who attended were peaceful, and many of the artists and bands performing at Woodstock were the same and carried the same views about peace and unity. Freedom by Richie Havens. Richie Havens is an American musician and songwriter. His music was centered around folk and soul. He was the opening act for Woodstock. The song Freedom by Richie Havens was a completely improvised song. Richie Havens was the 5th artist on the playbill, but the original 4 artists scheduled before him were stuck in the festival's traffic. The show directors told Richie to go on stage and play. He played through his whole 3-hour set that he had prepared, but the artists were still not there. Richie Havens had to come up with an encore for the crowd. He started playing his guitar, but he was stalling. Although he was lost with what to sing, he decided to start. The word that came out was freedom. Richie stated he used the word freedom because he saw it in the crowd. and he saw it as the new anthem of the American youth. Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Creedence Clearwater Revival, often referred to as CCR, is an American rock band. Many of their songs deal with political or socially conscious topics. They performed an hour-long set. CCR was also the first band that signed to play at Woodstock. Their set list was built with all of their hit songs, one of which was Bad Moon Rising. Without saying it word for word, Bad Moon Rising talks about the Vietnam War. Many Americans opposed the war because they felt devastated by the amount of loss and violence involved. Another reason is because of the draft. People didn't want to be forced to fight and kill. One line in the song states, "Hope you got your things together. Hope you are quite prepared to die." This shows how many felt about the war and why they opposed it. CCR related and Bad Moon Rising indicates how they felt. Woodstock perspectives. While in long-term history Woodstock is noted as a symbol of peace, love, and unity, there were still many opposing beliefs towards Woodstock before, after, and during the time of the festival. Before the festival, there was a fight to find land. Almost all the town John Roberts, Joel Roseman, Artie Cornfield, and Michael Lang ventured to hated the idea and did not want to be disrupted. Along with this, many town officials were passing bills and laws pushing back on the idea of Woodstock. However, this didn't stop the men. They found Max Yasker and his farm for the festival. During the festival, there were many issues with drugs and alcohol. 5,000 people were treated for injuries, illnesses, and use of drugs, and 100 arrests were made on drug charges. For the attendees of the festival, some would refer to it as miserable. By the second day, they ran out of food and water. By the third day, there were almost no functional bathrooms or sanitary stations. And throughout all of this, it rained and stormed, causing the venue to be filthy. Even through these events, the Monticello's police chief acknowledged them as being the most courteous, considerate, and well-behaved group of kids he had ever dealt with. After the festival, many were upset with the mess of garbage left behind and the easy access and use of drugs and alcohol. In many people's eyes, Woodstock was an occasion that resulted in injury, abuse of substance, and a gateway for other festivals to shadow the use of drugs and alcohol as a symbol of peace. Long-term, short-term. Some short-term effects Woodstock had on the world was the way that Woodstock validated many younger Americans' perspectives on civil rights and their views on the Vietnam War. Woodstock caused new ways of thinking. It gave counterculture a platform, so it became more recognized. Because of this, Woodstock is still known as a frontier of the 60s. Although there are many positive outcomes of Woodstock, it is also important to acknowledge the negatives. Sex and drugs became more mainstream or idolized in the 60s culture. Many people would relate Woodstock to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but the message of peace, love, and unity would eventually overshadow the negatives in long-term history. Now, Woodstock is acknowledged as the most influential music festival in history. The most significant long-term effect of Woodstock was the realization that people have the power to make a mark and cause change. Woodstock became as a noteworthy frontier of the counterculture movement of the 60s. The final act. When Woodstock ended on the third day, right after Jimi Hendrix's 2-hour set, the audience and world was left with the idea that anyone or anything can make a change in history. In addition, it leaves us with the value that when people join together in unity, it shows power and force. Because of every person that attended and every person who continues to recognize Woodstock, it has grown into a frontier of not only counterculture, but of peace, unity, and love. Edgar Winter says it best. When I played, I'll never forget that moment, looking out over the hundreds of thousands of people, the sea of humanity, seeing all those people united in such a unique way. It just touched me in a way I'll never forget.